Hello, my name is Aaron Cummings. I am 30 years old, and I was asked to give the story of myself and God. I guess the story of myself as related to God. Kind of hard to have actually God's whole story. But my story as relates to God, I was also asked to basically describe how long I've been a Christian, and that goes back to that same story because it's a little bit complicated for me, as probably for a lot of people. When I first started thinking about this, it reminded me of a NPR interview I was listening to on the way home from work a few months ago. And it was on Fresh Air, and they were interviewing the director and writer of Manchester by the Sea. And he was describing the process that went into making that movie. And after going through a lot of the technical details of writing and producing the movie, one of the details that popped up was the choice of music, the soundtrack for various parts of the movie. And at one point, it's actually a funeral. It's a really sad and somber part of the movie. They're playing a track from Handel's Messiah, actually, and they asked the director why he picked that particular section, because he is not a believer in God in any way, shape, or form. And basically, the music, as he said, is spine-tinglingly beautiful. And it is, but he also mentioned the words, which are taken from the Old Testament prophet Isaiah, and also the New Testament Gospel of Mark, and describe God as a shepherd, and then also Jesus asking people to let him remove their burdens. And he mentions that the lyrics would be awesome if you could only believe them. And that the offer that Jesus makes in the Gospel of Matthew, as Matthew recorded it, would also be amazing, but it's also essentially wishful thinking in his point of view, and I'm paraphrasing. And that is something that I can identify with. I was raised a Christian, but probably like a lot of people, I was not always one. Probably a lot of you listening to this or watching this, or both, have had the experience of seeing maybe a parody of God, maybe not a God who is real, or a God who is maybe a form of social control, or something you're not supposed to question, or a figment of imagination, and not actually anything that you would consider real, and therefore impossible to believe in. And so when I heard the director mention that, it struck home to me. That is because I felt that way once. That's no longer what I think, but I could identify. Since then, I could say that I've been able to come back to God and see Him in a different way, a new way. A lot of you watching this, maybe you have been exposed to the idea that God is maybe a human-centered idea. This goes back to like Ludwig Feuerbach and the idea that we project our own version of God, our own version of ourselves, really, onto the universe and create a God of our own imagination. And we can see this because we go around and seeing people basically projecting their hopes and wishes out there and claiming that God's going to answer them. And we're like, that has to be fake, that has to be fiction. But there's another side to it, and it happened later on in my life when I'd already graduated from a Christian college and was very much disillusioned with faith in general and God in particular. And my journey back to Christ came through two ways. One of them mentioned by the director of Manchester by the Sea, which is why I'm going back to that interview. You can look it up on NPR's website if you're interested. His name is Kenneth Lonergan. But he mentioned that we all have in our lives people who act that role. That's kind of like God. They show love, they show kindness. And that was my experience. I saw it at people in South Carolina, in North Texas, in Edinburgh, who were kind. And all these people had something in common. They all said they believed in God. And that raised a question, which was, where did that love come from? And I think it came from that source behind them, that God. Of course, there are plenty of good people who don't believe in God, but that's not my point here. My point here is, as I was trying to think about God, I was thinking back to those people who showed God's love to me in that way. And the second thing was, I might be the only Christian who came back to truth through the Tao Te Ching. which is an ancient Chinese text. But as I read through it, it resonated with me. The same Sermon on the Mount, not Mark. You can find it in Matthew and Luke, not Mark. The same Sermon on the Mount echoes some of the same things as the Tao Te Ching, and I began to realize that I couldn't just throw all these ancient texts that I've been taught out the window. That was impossible. The same ideas appeared all over the world in different centuries and different texts. And so putting together the thoughts of the people who were kind to me and my thoughts about what I had read in history, I began to come back to the openness of the idea there might be a God out there. And through a lot of experiences, I came back to that realization that maybe beyond the things I can understand, there might be a mystery that I can't understand. And so to wrap up my rambling here, here's what I would say. Probably a lot of you who are watching this or listening to this, maybe because the church hurt you, or because you just felt like you outgrew God, you walked away from Him. And I understand, I did too. But what is different, I think you can realize, is ultimately, if you are trying to understand things that are bigger than you, you will realize that they are bigger than you. That they are bigger than you, than what's behind everything. And for me, it's the humility to realize that there's something behind everything that I can't understand. Let's call it God. And let's call it Jesus, who is the same person that is sung in that piece of Messiah, who wants to be your shepherd and who wants to take your burdens. So I don't think it as wishful thinking at all. I think of it as humility and as realizing there might be a shepherd behind the universe who actually wants to guide us.